So welcome again, everyone. As I said a moment ago, my name is Matt Kleffenstein. I am the Graduate Fellowships Advisor for the National Fellowship Office and also one of the members for the Graduate Student Resources Hub, where we do various workshops like this one tonight about aspects of professional development. And so I'm going to be talking with you, and we're going to be working through some guided reflection really to help you think about the things that are important in terms of the work that you are doing and some ways, some language that might be useful for helping you effectively convey that in a variety of different settings. That's really our goal here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen for tonight's presentation. All right, can everybody see this? Somebody give you a thumbs up or something?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. All right. We are on Zoom, so we don't need that. So I just want to start kind of thinking with a couple things here about what it is that is, I think, the reason why a session like this might be useful for graduate students in a variety of programs, and then taking a moment to outline the specific goals I have for tonight's session. So I mentioned that I work in the world of fellowships, but that's just one part of the broader process of professional development as a graduate student. And really, whether you're applying for a grant or a fellowship, or you're putting together an application for a postdoc, or preparing for a job interview, whether that's an academic job or an industry job, there are going to be opportunities where you're going to have to share about the significance of what you're doing and about the values and ideas that motivate you for doing that. And so thinking about these two key questions, who are you and why the work you're doing as a graduate student, your research, your professional training matters. And so this session is really meant, again, to get you started thinking about those aspects here, giving you some ideas that you'll then be able to use in a variety of different applications, whether that might be any of those options that I just mentioned right here. And so, as I just said, the goal for tonight is really to get you generating ideas that you can then build out from and repurpose for a variety of different materials. Some of them might be useful just as a graduate student in terms of a proposal for a thesis and trying to clarify some of those things. Or again, preparing for a job search of any kind where you're going to be asked in one form or another about your interests, your motivations, why you do the things that you do, and why, especially for those of you in research-based programs, why that research matters, what its larger impact is. And one way to do that is to think about what is your personal narrative as a scholar, as a researcher, as a professional. So this is, again, meant to give you some prompts and some frameworks that can be useful in helping you articulate those particular points so that you can then refer back to some of the things that we'll do, some of the exercises that we're going to do together here for those different opportunities. So that is what I'm hoping that everyone is going to be taking away from here. And so the way we're going to do this is doing a little bit of guided reflection on research statements, on personal statements, and on the idea of scholarly identity in general here. I just want to start by contextualizing this a little bit within graduate education, where this communication piece really fits in. And I want to emphasize that research communication is one of the skills that you have the opportunity to learn as a graduate student. And I think this, along with professional writing, like for grants and fellowships, like for cover letters, different types of applications there, is part of your training as a graduate student, in addition to the specific courses you're taking, in addition to the mentored research that you're doing there. And so learning how to effectively communicate these things is part of what it means to be trained in the different fields that all of you are studying in right here. And particularly for anyone who's interested in a faculty or a research-based career, this is especially significant there. Because when you're explaining the nature and purpose of your research, what you're really doing is you're making an argument. You're explaining why what it is that you do matters to the different audiences that you might be communicating with. Maybe that's a funding agency, maybe that is a hiring committee, maybe this is a scholarly audience at a conference, but the same principle is there. And when we're thinking about communicating this for funding purposes or for work purposes, this is a reflection of your scholarly identity. What is the agenda that you have in terms of your research, and what are the reasons why you're pursuing that, both intellectual and personal in many cases. And so, again, learning to communicate these pieces is part of the larger training that I think that all graduate students should be going through. So starting with just that kind of context here for, again, why I think this is something that goes beyond any one particular application of it. And so I think it's also important to keep in mind the ways in which some of the opportunities you might be applying for are placing greater emphasis on some of these ideas about broader impact and about the kind of narrative and the values that you're bringing to things here. Jobs and fellowships increasingly want to see how you're making an impact through your work. The National Science Foundation uses this as a category called broader impacts. They want to know not just what the intellectual contribution is, but how it contributes to what they call desirable societal outcomes. Increasingly, other funders are interested in knowing what's the public value of research. Certainly government agencies are interested in that, and a lot of institutions are as well. They want to see that you're going to be a valuable part of the community and have a vision for what that looks like outside of just the specific activities you might be doing through your analysis, through the sources you're collecting, through the work that your lab is doing. This is also part of focus on efforts to improve diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether this would be at a university, whether this would be, again, with grant and funding agencies, whether this would be with corporations and other work sectors in private or public. There's an increasing attention to the importance of efforts to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, and understanding some more about the ways in which you're involved outside of your research or how you see your research contributing to those goals is something that a growing number of audiences are interested in. And so if you are interested in pursuing that kind of work, it's important to be able to spend some time thinking about those things and feel like you have an answer that you're comfortable with that reflects what you feel about these particular issues and about your work related to this. And so the goal here is then to figure out a way to explain how your research relates to your larger professional identity, what it is that you are hoping to accomplish in your particular field as a researcher, as a teacher, as someone who is engaged in various forms of community or public service. And particularly in terms of documents that you might write for a grant or fellowship, or especially for a faculty job or a postdoctoral application, research statements and personal statements and diversity statements are very common documents. And in some cases, there's some overlap as well, where you might be asked to submit a personal statement that asks you to address your experience with and commitments regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, for example, or to see how your research is making a larger impact beyond just its intellectual contribution as well. So there are a variety of different documents that you are likely, if you're trying to pursue that type of work, are going to end up preparing, and they're going to be interested in speaking to those particular themes. Oh, question about the acronym: diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is what DEI stands for. And sometimes different acronyms are used as well, but essentially this is efforts around diversity, around creating opportunity and equity within different types of environments there. And please, if you have questions, you can put them in the chat. I will try to keep an eye on it. I'll certainly make sure that there's time for questions at the end if I don't manage to see it right in the moment when it's asked. So before, though, you can actually write an effective research proposal or research statement, or write a strong personal statement, again, for any one of those things there, you need to be able to explain and first understand for yourself the significance of your research and have a sense of what your identity is as a scholar. And by that, again, I mean, what are the values, what are the motivations that have led you to pursue the particular research you're pursuing, and what it is you hope to accomplish through pursuing that research there. And when you're thinking about whether it's in an interview or whether it's in written documents there, how to communicate this is really about telling a cohesive story. Explain things that you've done in a variety of settings, all fit together and amounts to a larger vision that you have about your activities as a professional, as a scholar here. And again, in some cases, this is going to be related to these particular categories of broader impacts or diversity. And so we're going to go through some guided reflection and key questions. I'll share a document with you, which will have some prompts that you're welcome to spend some time looking at tonight, or to reflect on in greater detail on your own time. And I'll share some resources both in the presentation and linked at the end that you can use to continue this process here. And the goal of this guided reflection is that you can have some short answers, some language, some concepts you can then scale up. You can build it out into whatever it is that you're being asked to do, whether it's a one-page statement, whether it's a response to a question in an interview, whether it might be a larger document that you might be asked to submit here. So that's the big picture. That's the goal for what this workshop is really about. And so this is kind of how these things are going to fit together. So we're going to start by talking a little bit about your research and getting you to think about some questions related to that. And then also think about some of your personal journey, your values, your motivation, how you see yourself making an impact. And that in turn feeds into that notion of scholarly identity. Again, that's how those pieces relate. And what we're going to do as a result of that reflection is think a little bit about, maybe there's not enough time to actually formulate this here, but thinking about a sort of personal mission statement, a couple sentences that you can use just for yourself that succinctly capture these different features about how you see your values, your professional activity, and your public engagement relating, and what it is you're trying to accomplish with that, so that you have the clarity that you need, that you can then effectively communicate that in other forms there. Because it's going to be difficult for you to convince someone else and to make a clear and coherent case if you haven't really clarified those sort of things for yourself. So that's the shape of where we're going with all of this. We'll start by thinking about the research piece. And so let's think about what the purpose of this particular document might be. And again, here I'm thinking about for somebody who's interested in a faculty job or a postdoctoral position, where you're often asked to prepare this kind of document that does a number of things. It's really about establishing what is your agenda as a scholar, as a researcher. What are the themes, the questions, the topics that you are interested in? What's the specific work that you've been doing, and why does it matter? What's the contribution that it's going to make to your particular field, to larger issues in the world, whatever that might be. And it's also a document that's meant to connect your previous accomplishments to future plans in the world of research or your professional activity there. So showing what you've done, what you're currently doing right now, and also your vision of where you see yourself going. If this is for a faculty job, you're thinking about, where do you see yourself in several years, essentially, during that period leading up to tenure? What's the next project you plan to be working on, depending on your field? Or what are the sources of funding you plan on applying for? Those kind of goals there. So what your career is going to look like in the next several years, that's the larger goal of this particular type of statement that is very common for any academic job, and then for postdoctoral research positions. And so to do this, I'm going to give you a moment to think a little bit about some of these kind of questions here, because really that's what your statement is going to need to think about. And so I'm going to put in the chat a document, and we'll have some other prompts that we will get to a little bit later here. And I will also be sharing this document in a follow-up email along with the slides from the presentation for everyone here. I'll be sending that out tomorrow. And so again, for the interest of time here, we're not going to take the time necessary to really fully reflect on all these questions here, but I do think it can be useful just to try to think for yourself for a moment here about how you would go about answering these questions. If we were in person, I would take a little bit of time for you to share with one another. But since we're online here, I'll just give you a moment to think through how you might answer these. And if you don't have an answer, then that's a great opportunity to realize, okay, maybe I do need to spend a little bit more time. I'm not sure what I would say about that. Great, now you know that you have something you can prepare for and do a little research to make sure that you are ready when it comes time to communicate this. after tonight, and whenever you have some moments here, I encourage you to take a little bit more time and think more about these questions. Hopefully you were able right now even to generate a few ideas. You know, if you wanted to, maybe jotting down a couple of notes about some things here. But I think it's worth taking some time to reflect a little bit about this, because again, my goal for us here is for you to gain some clarity about what it is that you're trying to accomplish, so you can communicate it more effectively to others. And I think one of the things here that I'm trying to get you to think about is both the internal reflection, what it is that you think is important and what you want to communicate, and then also that external perspective. You know, what is someone else who's reading this for the first time or talking to you for the first time going to take away, who doesn't know anything about you, who's encountering your work, your experience for the very first time? So being able to shift between those perspectives, being able to think carefully about what it is that you're doing and what you want to accomplish, what you really want to get out of a particular experience there, but also think about what it looks like on the other side of things as well. And making sure that you're writing to that, so that reviewers are taking away the things that you want them to get out of it, so that hiring committees are you know, having a clear sense of what it is that you want to communicate about your research or about your goals here. So those are just some questions to get you started. Again, this is meant to generate ideas. This is not the final word here, but being able to answer these questions in one form or another is going to be important parts of putting together a successful research statement. When it comes to personal statements, this is a slightly different genre of a document. And it's not always the case that you might need to submit one. But there are aspects of this that fit into a number of different types of documents. It might be a statement of teaching philosophy. It might be a statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Again, some of the competitions that I work with for fellowships and grants do want a personal statement. That can be as short as a page. It can be longer. But fundamentally, whatever the format is, whatever the length that you're being given here, a personal statement is an argument. Really, any document that you're making is a form of persuasive writing, where the goal is to convince the reader that there's something significant and that you're the right person for a particular opportunity. So a personal statement is part of building that argument about you, that you're the right person for this experience at this time, and whatever that experience is taking place here. And so this is an opportunity to share something about your development as a scholar and as a professional, to provide some context about experiences that have shaped you, to draw attention to specific accomplishments and skills that you have, to help explain some of the questions and the issues that motivate you, and explain some of the plans and the goals that you have as well. I think personal statements can sometimes be challenging because they're not really a document that is similar to most of the academic writing that you would be doing as a graduate student or other types of professional writing here. And so I think sometimes it's hard to know where to start. And some students kind of gravitate towards making things almost like an exhaustive biography, trying to cover everything that's happened in their life. But I think it's really important to, again, think about this as your journey as a professional, as a scholar, as an intellectual, and think about the things that are relevant to that. And that could be many different things, because everybody comes to where they are for all sorts of different reasons. They might be primarily intellectual reasons. It might be because of particular experiences, or because of circumstances that have shaped your life, or because of you know, the groups or communities that you're connected with, and how those experiences have maybe motivated you to pursue certain questions, or have inspired you to try to tackle certain problems and things there. And so a personal statement is a place to flesh that out and let a reader understand what those sort of factors are, and why that's important to how you see yourself as a scholar and as a professional. It gives more of a narrative form to your life and shows how those different impacts, those different influences have impacted you in particular ways. So again, this is an argument, not that you're writing it necessarily in the way that you would, say, a journal article or anything like that, but still the takeaway should be about how you have ideas that are exciting, you have qualifications that make you a good fit, you're going to bring experiences that will add something to whatever the opportunity that you're pursuing is. And so if you look on the worksheet that I shared with you, the next little section here is a chance to do a little bit of brainstorming about those particular questions here. So again, I'll just give you a moment just to take a little time to reflect here. We will not have time to fully unpack this, but I do think it's useful to just pause for a second and think about immediately what comes to mind when you think about the experiences that most been important in shaping your intellectual interests. What was a key skill or a lesson that you learned from that particular experience? And then how do you contribute to the world outside of your research? It might be related to your research and your academic work, but what's the broader impact that you're doing? Could be teaching, could be mentoring, could be something unrelated to your specific field there. A lot of different options there, but thinking about those questions are going to be important for helping you clarify those pieces and figure out what those motivations are that have led you to do the things that you're doing right now. So I'll just pause here for a moment and give you a chance to reflect a little more on this. As I said before, this is just a starting point. So if you're not sure, if you feel like you don't have a clear answer, that's totally fine. This is just to get you thinking about some questions and identifying some areas where maybe it would be useful to spend a little bit more time reflecting. Or if you feel like maybe I really haven't done something in a certain area there, well, that's a good chance for you to think about, okay, well, if I would like to get that experience, what can I do now to accomplish in the next semester or year or the next 2 years or whatever? So that when I'm in a position where I might be writing a document that's going to ask me about these things, I feel confident in the kind of answers that I'm going to be able to bring here. So these are just some statements to get you thinking about, or some questions rather, to get you thinking about what these types of statements that you might encounter for fellowship or job applications are really trying to get at and what they're trying to learn about things. The next step is fitting these pieces together. So we've identified, or at least got you to start thinking a little bit about some of your key features of your research, the things that you find most interesting, the things you really think people would want to take away from it, and about some of the key experiences that have shaped you. You know, the things, the events, the mentors, the opportunities that have perhaps led you to apply to graduate school, or perhaps gotten you interested in a particular profession or field or discipline. Now, how do we fit those pieces together and articulate how they relate in terms of a larger vision of you as a scholar or as a professional in your particular field? And this is where that idea of scholarly identity really comes into play. How do you see yourself making an impact on your academic discipline and on your larger community? That can mean many things, and I'll leave it up to you to define it, and that might depend on the opportunity and what specifically you're being asked about there. The community might mean other people in your particular field, in terms of students and other people that you might be teaching and mentoring. It might be a larger university community. It might be a larger, feature of society or group that your research is really related to. So a lot of different things that could mean, and I'm not trying to suggest that it has to mean one thing or that it should mean something or something else there, but thinking about the impact that you're having both intellectually, in terms of how your ideas and your work is contributing, and how the things you're doing as a person, the activities you are involved in, whether as a teacher, as a mentor, in terms of professional service or community involvement, are having an impact too. And as I said before, this is something that's going to be important for any time you might be asked to write a statement about your commitments to diversity, and it's increasingly common on features of fellowship and grant applications. As I mentioned before, personal statements are a feature of a lot of major funders for the National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health for some of their fellowships. Major social science and humanities fellowships are increasingly asking about this language as well. Some universities are even increasingly helping draw attention to students and train them in terms of being able to address these sort of things too. So this is Again, there's a larger context for why these kind of questions matter and why it's important for you to be able to have an answer for thinking about this. So that's the idea of scholarly identity and the purpose that it might serve in terms of articulating your professional journey here. So in order to think about this, we're going to do another type of self-reflection here, which is trying to think about the different aspects of what the work of a scholar might look like. And here I'm really thinking about someone who's interested in an academic or research related role, who might be interested in a tenure track faculty position. I do think that this is applicable to other types of careers. So I think that it can be adapted in that way in terms of thinking about, what is my identity as a counselor, my identity as a classroom teacher, if you're in, say, a master's in counseling program or getting a master's in education or something like that. But my focus here in this framework is really going to be more about someone who's interested in a faculty career. So I just want to keep that in mind here in terms of the examples that I'm going to be using. And so if you're interested in a faculty career, in a university teaching career, that work is really going to encompass several different domains. There will be your work as a researcher, that scholarly productivity. In most cases, you'll be involved in some kind of teaching activity as well. And you might be involved in something related to that in terms of working as a mentor, whether that's to students who might be in your lab, whether that might be to a postdoctoral researcher or graduate students if you are eventually a primary investigator or a tenured faculty member. And then there will be service that goes along with that as well. Service to the university, service to the discipline. That would mean working for your department, work on committees, serving as a reviewer for journals and manuscripts, positions in professional societies. And then, of course, any other sort of social commitments and public impact that your scholarly activity is going to have here. And so to do this, I'm going to be adapting an exercise that was created by the anthropologist Mary F. Price, who is at Indiana University, Purdue University, Indianapolis, and their Center for Service and Learning. And this is an open access educational resource that Dr. Price has created. And I'll send you a link rather to the full document that has some additional readings. It has some worksheets and some self-guided activities. I've adapted kind of smaller scale versions of a couple of them for tonight here, but if you find this interesting and you'd like to develop it a little bit more, you can definitely follow up with those additional resources that are openly available. And this is an activity that was designed really to help tenure track faculty members think about these sort of things for their own tenure and promotion cases. But again, I think that they apply very well to graduate students, and I think with a little adaptation, they can apply to other types of career paths as well. But I want to make sure I'm getting credit here to where these ideas are coming from. And so in this idea of scholarly identity mapping, there are a number of questions that it's useful to think about, and that really these exercises are meant to help you start generating there. And these are questions like, who am I as a scholar and a practitioner? What are the public purposes of my scholarly work? So how does what I'm doing as an intellectual, as a researcher, translate into the larger world, however we define that in terms of who it includes or where that reaches? What are my values as a practitioner, teacher, and scholar? Not just what I'm doing, but what are the reasons behind it, the things that lead me to do the things that I'm doing in all of those domains, in the research that I'm doing, in the way that I teach my classes, in the way that I mentor my students, in the way that I choose how I am involved within my larger community, professional community, or just the places that you live in. How are values expressed through my scholarly work? What outcomes guide my public work? What is it you're trying to accomplish? Do you have a particular agenda with the research that you're doing there? And in all this, what makes me distinctive? What's your particular approach? What is your philosophy of your research? What is your philosophy of the kind of impact that you would like to have here? And I want to emphasize that there's not any one answer for this, and they're not really right or wrong answers for this. These are just questions to get you to think about what matters to you and how that relates to the things that you do, so that you can explain that to other people in a way that's compelling and cohesive, with the kind of details and substantive examples that will make a strong case that yes, this is in fact the way that you operate, and how you're likely to continue to operate if you're given the opportunity that you're applying for here. So you can keep thinking about these, and again, you'll have the resources that will give you a chance to reflect a little bit more on this. But these are kind of the big questions that scholarly identity mapping exercises are meant to get you to start developing answers for. So let's think about that first piece. What are your scholarly values? And I'm placing the emphasis here on scholarly. So the research aspect here. These are not necessarily everything you might value as a person. You know, we all have a lot of values in a lot of different domains. Some of them are personal, some of them are professional, some of them are public. But in terms of what you value as a scholar, as a researcher, as a professional in the field that you are currently pursuing your graduate degree in. So think about 3 to 4 different examples of this. I've given a number of examples here on this list that I've taken for Mary Price's scholarly identity mapping exercise here, but you could add other things as well. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are some of the things that you might value as a scholar. And so I would encourage you to take a minute here and see which ones on this list really jump out to you, or if they're not speaking to you, or if there are other ones that came to mind there, what ones you would add to this here in terms of the values that you want to have associated with the work that you are doing as a researcher or the professional activity that you're planning to pursue in the field in which you're getting your graduate training right now. So I'll just share, you know, when I've thought about this for myself, my own training, I have a PhD in history, and when I think about that work and the sort of values that I tried to pursue there, the ones that I come up with are humility, dialogue, and then I added generosity, which was not on this list there, because one of the things that I aimed for was really trying to be fair to other people's work and scholarship, and to really try to read it in the most charitable way that I could, rather than assuming that there are, you know, enormous flaws that need to be immediately critiqued there, because in my experience, there was a lot of justifiably so critical perspectives that you're being trained in, and you're learning how to spot where there's need for research, and you're learning how to spot weaknesses there, which is a key part of graduate training. But sometimes I think that there's a tendency where that means that you can kind of forget about all of the work that goes into creating a work of scholarship, and not see the accomplishment that's there, even though there might be flaws and things that you can critique. And so those are just some of the values that I tried to incorporate there. As I said before, these are not right or wrong. Any one of these and many others are all have things that they can contribute to the work of scholarship. And we're all drawn to different sort of things there. So maybe you're really focused on things like accuracy and objectivity, and rigor. Those are key, that you want to make sure that, you know, the data you're collecting is being analyzed, is being treated appropriately, and being held to very high standards there. Maybe you're really interested in you know, the way you're doing your scholarship there, in terms of who's being able to be involved in it. You're thinking about issues of justice and inclusivity and equity. That's fine as well. Maybe you're really interested in how that scholarship is going to translate into other spheres of life. What is it going to mean, you know, for the world of business or larger economy? And so maybe things like entrepreneurialism or innovation are really important as well. Again, these are your values, and that is entirely up to you. And I'm not saying one of these is more important than another there, but it's useful to figure out which one of these are more of your priority, because I think everyone leans in certain directions. And while I'm sure we could all come up with good reasons for the value of any one of these and everything on this list and beyond that, it's always going to be the case that there are certain ones that we're going to gravitate and really place a little bit more emphasis on. And so being able to figure out which one of these stand out a little bit more, that if you really had to say, I can only pick 3, which would those be? Because that'll give you a sense about what are the things that are perhaps most important and what are helping shape your decisions here. And you'll see on the second page of the worksheet that I shared in the chat, that there's a space where you can write those sort of things down if you'd like to do that. And again, you don't have to do that right now. You can print this off and take a little bit of time later on if you want to reflect on this a little bit more. But I do think it's useful to sometimes actually just put pen to paper and make a decision about this. Doesn't mean you have to commit to this forever and ever in terms of these are the values that I have there. But I think it does say something that certain ones might stick out to you at this point right now. And again, it's helping to give you clarity about the sort of things that are important. So scholarly values are one important part of scholarly identity mapping. Let's take this a step further. So you've got some of these values here. If you had to describe yourself as an academic professional with using just a couple of descriptors and 2 to 3 adjectives there, what would they be? What are the words or the terms that best capture your scholarly work and your values? And again, I've got a list here of some possibilities. So you can think of other ones, and please feel free, if you're taking some time to reflect right now, to come up with other ones if you don't feel like this is capturing the sort of things that you would want to use to describe yourself. But think about how you might describe those sort of things there. What's the noun that you really see yourself as? Is it a leader? Is it a scholar? Is it a clinician? Is it a teacher? Is it an entrepreneur? And what are the kind of adjectives that you would want to attach to that particular noun? Are you justice focused? Are you seeing yourself as being an activist? Do you see your interest really being in terms of the translational aspect? Do you see your work arising from needs based in the community? Do you really try to take a student-centered approach or a publicly responsive approach to things there? So I've given some examples of what this might look like. Somebody might choose to describe themselves as a student-centered leader, or a community-engaged clinician, or a scholar activist. Again, this is not about right and wrong answers. There's not a reason why you should choose to be or think you should be one of these as opposed to something else. This is a way to think about how I can generate language for myself that will help me explain to me and then also to other people about how I think about how I want to function in a professional capacity. Because again, this is language that you can build out into the kind of statements that you'll want to be making in cover letters, or that will help you communicate what's going on in a personal statement or even in an interview setting. So again, think about which are the ones that jump out. How do you see yourself primarily in terms of the category you would put yourself in as a professional with academic training? And then what are the adjectives that you think help encapsulate your particular approach to that? Because again, what I'm trying to get us to think about here is, what is your particular philosophy? If you're a researcher, is there a particular perspective that you bring to it as a researcher in terms of the type of research you want to do or the impact you want it to have? If you think about yourself primarily as an educator, that teaching and that mentoring component is really significant to what you're doing. Is there a reason for that? Is it because you're interested in a focus on justice and equity, or because you're really interested in the centering the perspectives of your students, or because you're interested in helping bridge that gap between academic audiences and the rest of society there. You want to be a public-facing intellectual. This is, again, a way of giving you language that will help you encapsulate in just a couple of sentences very quickly what your particular philosophy is. And once you have that in place, then it'll be easier to elaborate on that, which is going to be the next stage here. So I encourage you to take some time, when you have a moment, maybe this weekend or at some point in the coming weeks or over the summer, and reflect a little bit on this and ask yourself these questions here, because I do think it can be useful to get some specific language there and actually name some things that you think are important, because it will help you make that case. It will give you a way to frame the experiences that you have in a way that is cohesive and helps to tell that larger holistic story about the experiences and the skills and the goals that you have. So we thought a little bit about your scholarly values. We've got a description here, or at least we're starting to think through a description about how you would describe yourself as an academic professional. The next thing is thinking about how are the different pieces of the work that you're planning on doing related to each other here. So I mentioned, again, we're thinking about primarily kind of in an academic context here, the different domains of your work. But if you're thinking about something else, you can add in whatever aspects would go into that. So if we're thinking about the work of scholarship and university professorship, researching, teaching, mentoring, advising, professional service, community involvement, all of these are things that are potentially going to be related here. And so my question for all of us is, how do you see those different domains relating to each other? And again, this is not a question of which one of these is the right answer. The answer is not full integration necessarily. It's not that my teaching informs my research, which guides my mentoring, which is crucial to how I'm involved in the community. For some people, teaching and mentoring maybe is a little bit separate from their research. That maybe you value both of them, but you see teaching and mentoring and advising as being closely related. But the focus there isn't necessarily that you see those things strongly informing your particular research agenda. That's completely fine, but it's helpful to be able to articulate that and think about how you see those things fitting together. Or again, maybe you're involved in your community in a variety of ways, but it's not in a way that's necessarily directly connected with your research. The way that you want to have a broader impact, say on the campus you're in, or the larger city that it's part of, or the profession, isn't necessarily through your research agenda, but maybe it's through promoting other sorts of initiatives because you're passionate about other kind of outcomes there. So again, this is helping you identify how you would like to see these kind of connections there. Whether you see them all as being closely related or maybe somewhat related, maybe there's some overlap between the teaching and the research, the mentoring, the service there. Maybe you see them as being largely separate. Whatever is the case, again, being able to visualize it, I think, can be a useful way of helping you understand how you approach these particular things. So that if anyone ever asks you about that, or if you're responding to a particular prompt in a statement to say about your teaching philosophy, or again, your commitments around diversity, equity, and inclusion, you can have a framework for yourself that will help you make sense of how you see these pieces relating together here. So again, take a minute to think about that and see if any of these diagrams resonates with you in terms of how you think these pieces were there. And if you've never thought about that before, great. This is a good time to do it. Going forward is a good time to do it, so that, again, when you encounter this in a professional setting, you will have already had a chance to think a little bit more about how you would respond to this. All right, in the interest of time, we're going to keep going, but again, something to come back to and resources that I will be sharing with you so that you can dive in a little bit deeper than what we're able to cover in just an hour this evening. So we've covered a number of things here. We've identified some scholarly values. We have come up with a description of how you see yourself as an academic professional. We've thought about how you would like those different aspects of your professional activities to relate to each other here. So we have kind of a vision of your philosophy of things here. The next step then, to actually make this compelling in terms of communicating it in a way that will convince people, is to connect these with specific actions. It's one thing to say that you're, a justice-oriented scholar, but what does that actually mean? Well, you need to be able to point to things that you've done and say, well, this has motivated how I've conducted research in terms of the way that I'm involved with certain communities, or it's influenced my particular philosophy of teaching, or the way that I've gone about mentoring students, or the activities that I've chosen to dedicate my time to outside of my research work. So connecting those values to specific actions, accomplishments, to make that case compelling, so that when you say, yes, these are the values that I'm interested in scholarly, the innovation that research can bring into the world of business, you can point to examples of how you've pursued opportunities to build those connections between academia and industry, for example. And then you'll have those good substantive examples in your job documents and in the responses to questions and interviews and so forth that will really make a strong impression on the people who are going to be interacting with you. So here, borrowing again from Mary Price, thinking about this idea of what are the public purposes of your work? And we can think about public in a number of senses here. Maybe it's community involvement, maybe it's thinking again about how what's happening in your research connects with the larger world of industry, or with, again, particular groups of people there. Think about how you would respond to these questions. What are the essential public purposes of my scholarly work? Is there a way in which you hope your work is going to impact the larger world? Maybe you're doing research on a particular engineering field, and you're hoping to be able to help address climate change by producing more energy efficient vehicles. Maybe you're in a social science field and you're concerned about, say, racial wealth gaps, and you want to research that with an eye of being able to inform better policy that will address these inequities in society. So how do you want to see your research make an impact in the larger world? It doesn't mean that that's necessarily the only thing that you want to have happen there, but I would like to think that all of us have a reason why we're interested in certain topics, and that those topics are not just purely intellectual. They're not just purely theoretical, but they make contact with everyday life and with decisions that are being made, and with an impact on people and communities outside of just the context of where you're conducting your research here. And so this is where you can think about those values that you listed and how they connect with these particular purposes. And I have two sentences that are very similar, and they're kind of getting at the same idea in slightly different ways, and they're on the worksheet I shared with you as well. How would you complete the sentence? My work enacts my public purposes, it advances public ends by what? So whatever the purpose that you identified, again, I gave you some examples. How is it helping to do that? Is it helping to address inequity in society by developing models that that policymakers can adopt, or by helping to solve challenges in information technology that will allow for better data analysis tools that will improve health outcomes for people? Lots of different things that this could potentially be done, or how you could articulate that. And in a variation of that, you could say my work on whatever this particular topic is enacts my public purposes and advances public ends because, and you can again provide those kind of reasons there. So this is where the rubber meets the road, where you can point to something that you have done in your work and connect it with the values that you've identified here, so that you can make that argument and say, yes, this is something that I'm interested in doing. And again, particularly thinking about personal statements, particularly thinking about anytime you're asked to think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or what National Science Foundation calls broader impacts. These are the types of responses that you can then draw upon. I'm not saying you would use this word for word. You would not. You wouldn't necessarily, say my 3 values are this. That's not what we're really getting at here. But it's helping you think about some of those key terms that you can then build out and adapt and expand upon in different contexts, knowing that you've already identified for yourself some big picture driving motivations and goals and outcomes that it is that you're really interested in. So that's the public purpose thing. And again, public in a very broad sense of whatever the sort of adjectives that you were thinking about a couple minutes ago in terms of connecting with your academic identity. And finally, the last step, and really the point where we're going to end here, is pulling all of this together in a little statement that ties all of these things, all those pieces into a couple of sentences that can kind of cohesively encapsulate the relationships you see between the things that you've done, between the public impact you would like to have, and between the values that you've identified. And here I'm drawing upon an exercise that Hannah Albert Abrams in a free ebook called Finding Your Purpose, a Higher Calling Workbook for Justice-Oriented Scholars in an Unjust World has put together. I'll have a link for this as well in the slides that I'll be sharing with you. If you're interested in doing any of the other exercises that are in that particular resource, because there are a number of interesting things that are also provide opportunities for guided reflections here. And so this is an example that's provided that Hannah Albert Abrams provides in her work there. And her statement is, in my scholarship, I aim to use technology to build community, increase transparency, fight inequity, and create a better future for the humanities. I seek to maintain boundaries around my job that allow me to prioritize my relationship to the land I occupy and the people I love. So this touches on a number of different things. There's some things that are personal, some things that are public, some things that are scholarly. And this is one person's personal response to that. Again, I'm not suggesting that this is what yours should be, or that you would name the exact same things, or that you would try to understand your relationship between these domains in the same way. It will be different for different people, and that's totally fine. It's, again, helping you to understand what that means for you, so that you can really share that in a compelling way, and it will help you stay focused too, so that you're not getting pulled in so many different directions with all the demands that are upon you as a graduate student, and especially when you're at the stage when you're searching for work as well, the different questions that you're thinking about there. You can stay grounded and have a sense of what it is that you value and what you want, and that will make you better able to communicate to different audiences using different language, but fundamentally conveying the same sort of experiences and the same vision of who you want to be in the world as a professional based on these sort of things here. So I'd encourage you, again, this is just 2 sentences right here. You could make yours a little bit longer. You might be able to fit it all in 1 sentence, depending on what it is that you're trying to say here. But having a short little statement of purpose, I think, is a great way to encapsulate all of these things that we've been thinking about here, and will help you have some guidance, some self-directed guidance for how you want to respond to some of these different things. All right. So what I would recommend going forward is to take a stock of all of this. And again, we just kind of went over this for the sake of time tonight. We didn't have a chance to really reflect on it and work on it, but that's fine. This is something that's very personal. I don't expect you to necessarily share this with other people right now, unless you would want to. But I think it could be useful to draft a couple of short paragraphs about your scholarly identity and about your research significance, based on the prompts that we've gone over tonight, based on the activities that we've done here. So thinking about how you want to see your research contributing to your discipline and the broader world, and another handful of sentences about your scholarly identity, those values that motivate you, the experiences that demonstrate this. Again, you always want to connect it with some concrete examples of activities you've done, experiences you've had, research that's been performed that really illustrates that. And once you have a couple paragraphs like that, then this can be great references as you work on other sorts of documents, whether that would be a personal statement for a fellowship, or grants, depending on the funding agency. Or again, if you're working on academic job documents for postdocs or faculty positions here. And as I said before, these are building blocks. This is language that you can, and ideas that you can take and you can repurpose here. It's not the sort of thing where you're going to take this word for word from this brainstorming activity and just drop it into this other document there. But it will give you some clarity around ideas, and that can be really useful in terms of how you would tailor your response to the particular formats, to the particular genre, to the particular question that you might be asked here. And as I mentioned, these are the resources that are available out there. These links are embedded in the slides, which again, I will be sharing tomorrow morning with all of you who are here tonight. And I encourage you to follow up with all of them. I think that they're very useful. They go into much greater detail than we were able to do in just an hour together this evening. But if you found this to be useful, even in the abbreviated form in which we're doing it, then I would really encourage you to follow up and take this a little bit further and in a little bit more depth here. And if you would like to continue the conversation with me, as again, I mentioned, my work is primarily in the area of fellowships, but I'm always happy to talk about research communication. and I work with the National Fellowships Office, and you're more than welcome to schedule an appointment with me virtually or in person through my scheduling link there, calendly.com/gradfellowships, or to send me questions to just by email to about anything that we covered in our time together here this evening. All right, I will send a link in just a moment here, actually, to give you an opportunity to provide a little bit of feedback. Let me pause or stop things right here, rather, and open it up for any questions. And once I have a chance to put that little link in the chat, I will be happy to respond to them. All right, so that's just a short feedback form. The purpose of that is just to give me a sense of what you found useful or what you were hoping to hear and maybe didn't hear, just to help me best offer sessions and opportunities and resources that you find to be useful. So we'll just take a minute, and I'd appreciate whatever your comments are, because it's always useful to receive feedback. But are there questions about anything that was covered here? Or other things that may have come to mind just as I've been presenting, or maybe that you were hoping to hear more about that wasn't touched on in as much detail. I will go ahead and actually stop the recording at this point.